Before germ theory, what did medieval scientists make of fungal growth on rotting food? Seeing as the prevailed theory for a long time was that illness was primarily caused by an imbalance in the four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. What was the theory concerning what was causing microbial growth on things like rotten food? Did they suspect a link to illnesses? The answer: they thought organic matter, in particular recently dead organic matter, was imbued with a residual life force. This life force could result in the spontaneous generation of new organisms from dead organic matter, not just fungi, but also flies and even mice. This from Chymist, Jan Baptist van in 1671. When water from the purest spring is placed in a flask steeped in leavening fumes, it putrefies, engendering maggots. The fumes which rise from the bottom of a swamp produce frogs, ants, leeches, and vegetation. Carve an indentation in a brick, fill it with crushed basil, and cover the brick with another so that the indentation is completely sealed. Expose the two bricks to sunlight, and you will find that within a few days, fumes from the basil, acting as a leavening agent, will have transformed the vegetable matter into veritable scorpions. If a soiled shirt is placed in the opening of a vessel containing grains of wheat, the reaction of the leaven in the shirt with fumes from the wheat will, after approximately 21 days, transform the wheat into mice. Philosophers and naturalists who believed in this idea were called vitalists, as they believed in the theory of vitalism. It was originally thought that this life force had a supernatural origin, imbued into life by Almighty God Himself, but it was later imagined as some form of natural energy, unique to life, outwardly expressed as electricity or a magnetic fluid. This theory of vitalism and spontaneous generation persisted far longer than it deserved, well into the 19th century, as some scientists believed that at least simple microscopic organisms, amoeba, fungi, bacteria, could spontaneously generate from dead organic matter, and this explained purification, fermentation, and parasitic diseases. Before its end, the theory of spontaneous generation received a major blow in the late 18th century from the Italian scientist Lazzaro, who conducted experiments with heated broths in sealed glass bottles. For a time, the theory of spontaneous generation was in retreat, but there was revived interest again, driven primarily by British scientist John and French scientist Georges Louis Leclerc Comte, who failed to properly repeat Spallanzani's experiment. They didn't heat the broth sufficiently. It wasn't sterile. It contained heat-resistant bacteria. However, Louis Pasteur finally disproved the last vestiges of spontaneous generation via a series of elegant experiments conducted in 1859 that in turn proved the germ theory of nature. Using boiled fertile broth, pasteurized soup, inside glass bottles that were not airtight, but separated from the outside air by a fluid or airlock valve. Swan-neck flasks. Pasteur showed that if the broth was sufficiently heated, killing all bacteria and heat-resistant spores, the broth would not spoil. Only after opening the bottles, well to be precise, tilting the cleverly designed bottles so unheated liquid in the neck of the flask, visibly contaminated, entered the broth would then spoil. Critically, because the swan-neck flasks weren't hermetically sealed, but allowed air in when the broth was boiled, this cleverly disproved stubborn critics who claimed that air itself contained the vital principle that caused spontaneous generation. Follow this channel for more Santa Explains.